All right, now good to go. Started the recording. Welcome to the SUSE Q Tools workshop. It's the beginning of the month, and as usual, on the first Friday of a month, I would like to go with you over the roadmap of the SUSE Q Tools team. First, to discuss what we have achieved in the last working period. That is the month of November 2022, and then take a look onto what are we still working on. Let's say like what we plan to do until the Christmas break of this year, and then what's the mid and long-term plan and where our tasks that we work on fit in. So let me switch to sharing the screen, and I will share my browser window. And here, as usual, from our team wiki page, I will provide a link in chat. So if you like to follow, then here what you can see is find links to the backlog, the high-level view, top-level view, what members of the team are working on, and closed within the last 60 days. Let's start with that. Honestly, I have to admit that the past days I was in vacation. I was taking days off, and then this turned into sick leave. So I didn't properly prepare myself. So let's see if I will also be surprised by some tasks here. Sorry. As I said, I only want to take a look into what we did over the last month, so roughly 32 days since we had the last meeting, and in general we worked on 63 tickets. So that's more or less our average ticket velocity, that we have 2 tickets resolved per calendar day, and we can take a look into the different categories. We have here, for example, 3 tickets which are bugs in existing tests, so actual OpenQA tests that we worked on or helped to work with, and 12 bugs in OpenQA, 8 feature requests, 1 new test. So that's interesting. Oh yeah, right, this is related to the Raspberry Pi real hardware approach, mostly followed by Dominic Heidler, who joined us for that time period. He was previously in the QE squad QE core, where he started to work on this, and he continued that work as a low ticket loss. So let's say it's a side task while he was working on tasks within the SUSE Q, 3 organizational and 1 support ticket. And then there are also 35 blank. So let me switch to Cloud Pipe project. And we have that overview from a different angle. So as you can see, there's a big section OpenQA infrastructure. And if you take a look here, a big whole block of red stuff, which means that mostly reactive work, which was partially related to some planned work. And then there were user reports, which we could link to the planned changes in the infrastructure, but there were also some, some common alert handling, unexpected regressions, performance problems, and such. Then 24 in the OpenQA project, where I mentioned the categories in before, 4 OpenQA tests, 6 from the generic QA project, and then 5 from the internal SUSE QA project. Let's take a look into QA. So we had, we have an internal Jenkins instance. There were missing monitoring data. That was a small issue. We have the QEM bot. A QEM bot is the component that triggers SLE maintenance tests, and also then, depending on the results, approves SLE maintenance updates. What happened here is that the bot approved an update request, but there were obviously failing tests. So we had a mismatch in data. And related to that, we also have the next ticket, which is that there were incidents which had missing aggregate test results in the dashboard, but in OpenQA, if you take a look, then OpenQA jobs exist. So related story, that when you take a look in OpenQA, you find certain tests, and then either the QM bot approves updates despite having failed tests, which shouldn't happen, or what was the case is that there are tests which are present but are never visible in the dashboard, but still would block the approval. But then the users also wouldn't have a good possibility to say, like, okay, identify those tests and work on the test failures to unblock the. One of the problems was that what is done is that test references within the database that is used for approval were are regularly pruned, which is a necessary feature because there we also have some, let's say, some rolling cache. And what happened is that this removal approach prematurely removed results which were still valid. So we fixed the approach to still make sure that eventually we remove old results to prevent, that running out of storage or have a low performing dashboard, but still keep the relevant incident related tests. With that, we concluded the Epic stable and reliable QEM bot, meaning that QEM bot, which is a proper public open source project, which is maintained by SUSE QE Tools team. And when I say SUSE QE Tools team, it's not just individuals, but really multiple members of the team and really the team. So if there is a bigger issue, if there's a problem or if there's rework needed, then we as a team, we would say we would be able to work on that. However, on the other side, it is a proper public open source project where any contribution by like any of you guys would be reviewed by us, and we would make sure that a decision is taken how to proceed. As well as to ensure stability, we do have much higher test coverage, or automated tests in improved test coverage, included them in CI and pull request validation and so on, so that we can also trust the checks and the tests that are done within a pull request, and then give a approval mostly based on CI results and our code review. One more topic which is related to QEM bot is that what we would like to see is that QEM bot can post a comment on IBS and tell you, like, if you create a sleep maintenance update request, and then eventually, if the only blocker for approval is that there are failing tests, then you should be informed. And that information should happen over IBS, because this is where people create the release request. And we had a solution which was, let's say, not at the right time, because what it would do is it would how to say, it would be triggered like once daily, and then it would tell in all the not approved tests that, yeah, there's something still failing, which isn't that helpful. But rather we want to have it at the time when we go over the approval cycle, which is every couple of minutes. Whenever a test that failed is blocking the approval, then we post a comment on IBS on the corresponding release request with information about which failing test is blocking the approval. But not repeat that message multiple times, but only have it once or maybe update. The alternative, of course, is that if there are no blocking test results, then just approve the update and flag it for releasing. Now let's go into more detail in OpenQA infrastructure. So yeah, tiny issue, the OpenQA OpenSUSE org web UI was down due to a regression in a pull request, which I created. I put in that regression, so sorry about that. It was a short downtime because we noticed over monitoring. And how could that happen is, well, because we were changing code that is not it wasn't covered in automated test coverage. So there is what's our code coverage? I think somewhere in the range of 95%. And that means that there are still some smaller black areas where if changes happen, then this and yeah, we have 98% of code coverage, means that there is still a 2% part of the code. If we do have changes there, then there might be regressions which we only see in production if not covered by manual. The change that we did there is actually introducing more static code checks using Perl signatures. And with Perl signatures, the problem of wrong code usage will show much sooner. But of course, when we introduce the signatures, then we might get it wrong. So this is how it happened here. And then we had some so this and this and this at least and this ticket, they were all related to the necessary change in the network infrastructure. So SUSE IT was asking us to conduct a change and working with us to migrate servers and their network connections, servers that are within the SUSE Nuremberg data center. And that includes the OpenQA workers for OpenQA SUSE. And that change involves an IP range change, a change in the DNS domain, but also in introducing a firewall, so having a much more restricted traffic, which is basically defined on a path list. So any traffic from any OpenQA machine that's like OpenQA workers to other machines needs to be put on that path list of the firewall. And the goal there is to have a much more segmented and therefore much more secure network, but of course there can be regressions due to that, and there are likely also other related changes. So I wonder, for example, about Emu DNS fails to resolve OpenQA SUSE IP address. Was that also related to the firewall or something different? So right. So this was basically a problem in the DNS server, which was one of the DNS servers which wasn't up to date. So yeah, that problem only showed up because of the network security zone migration, but it was already persisting in the SUSE infrastructure before that one of the DNS servers was faulty. But yeah, one only realizes this way. Now that is fixed. Let's take a look into the OpenQA project. So we had OpenQA client does not get complete asset list. This was a regression due to a feature that we work on, that we want to limit all API and web UI routes to limit the number of objects that one is receiving one at a time. For example, to prevent an overload of the web UI by anyone by intent or unintendedly trying to get all the jobs, which are millions or billions of jobs, over one single API request, and we want to limit that. There are different approaches to that. So one approach is that we introduce a limit, so that initially, unless explicitly specified, the number of objects is limited, and that limit we want to have specific, like for jobs is a different limit than for test suits, is a different one than for asset lists, than for screenshots, and so on. And a second approach is then to use pagination. And that's work that is still ongoing, where one can get like the first, if the number of total results exceeds the specified limit, then one can get a first page, and then there's a link to a subsequent page. So if you want to get more, then you could follow that link or provide an offset for that window to say which are the next results that you would like to get. Let's see what else. So as you can see here in the category, these were all bugs I mentioned, and we already concluded to have pagination for bugs and assets, and for other routes that's ongoing. We are referencing more blocks on our documentation, so let me show you that, because we found that we have some awesome, cool other blocks which we can mention here. So for example, we have OpenAI bytes, the quiz block, OpenSUSE Reddit presence, and also the Twitter presence by OpenAI HQ we mentioned here. We just found out or found again that one of the SUSE music parody videos mentions OpenQA. So I would like to mention that here as well. Anyone wants to make a guess which video it is, or knows it already? Which of the SUSE music parody videos mentions OpenQA? Maybe there's more than one. I only know of one. So if you don't know, then take a look on the documentation page sometime in the future, and we should reference it. Then document suggested workflows for multiple teams running OpenQA test results. So multiple teams, of course, can come up with different workflows how to use OpenQA. We had multiple documents or suggestions on internal documentation mentioning some idea. The time has come. No, I don't think it was that one. Sometimes I don't know the title of the video. I only know some line of the lyrics. Is it called The Time Is? Let me make a short look. Oh yeah, it's We Didn't Start the Kernel. Yeah.
Sorry, Ollie, just go on. It was a joke, okay? Go on.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, okay, so please, guys, don't go and watch the YouTube video. Reserve that for later. Please listen to me, okay? Right. So we had some internal documentation regarding workflows. And what I did is that I opted to put it on the upstream documentation. So here, there's a section suggested workflow for test review. And there we have mentioned multiple ideas, like how can you review tests and coordinate your work within teams where multiple people and multiple teams review test results with multiple products, multiple job groups, and so on. So I would be really happy to hear your feedback about that documentation. And if you find something that should be added here, because this can basically be a list of suggestions and steps to try, then feel very welcome to provide an addition to the documentation by pull request, or create a ticket with a suggestion or in GitHub issues. So with that, we could also conclude the make reviewing OpenQA results per squad easier epic, which of course included not just the documentation change, but also other features, multiple ways to address the needs of different teams, how to review test results, for example, auto review, the force results, the QEM bot approach to mark individual test failures as approvable per incident, and so on. Then, yeah, one thing which I would like to mention is that we're not complete. We are constantly working on increasing code coverage. So in this case, on OS order in space test, I already showed the code coverage value as calculated by CodeCov. That's the statement coverage actually. And for OS order inst as well as for other projects, the same applies, that we want to have a good code coverage, because only then you can actually trust your changes. You can see in OS order inst, the value is lower. Of course, that needs to be decided on a case-by-case base where it's important and what part is important. But what you can see is that there is a steady increase. If I take a look over the long time, then you can see that, yeah, we are consistently over time improving the code coverage, and we are nearing like a near 100%. In some areas, we already have reached 100%, for example, for the OpenQA folder, and that is making our job easier, because then we can say whenever there is a code change, regardless if it's from an SUSE QE tools member or someone outside the team, then we can know that at least unit tests covered the code. So some trivialities do not need to be checked by human reviewers, and we can focus more on the actual validity of the change, or conducting some high-level test cases based on that. So my goal would be to make sure that certain areas of the code is completely covered, so that we can have that trust, for example, OpenQA. And then for T, that's the test folder, we did have 100% test. We should soon go back to 100% test, because I think it doesn't make sense to have tests which are never executed, because tests are there to be always executed. But in some cases, it could be that the code coverage analysis isn't complete, so that actually the complete test is executed, but then we didn't manage to cover everything. And you can see that some smaller files are already completely covered, and some other cases like OCR is like, yeah, nearly not covered at all. By the way, if you're interested, there is a definition file, CodeCov YAML. And what we can see here is that we have fully covered target 100 with this mentioned path, meaning that whenever you do changes in any of those files, so for example, if you change the VMware console and you introduce code that is not covered anymore, then CI checks will fail. So we cannot accept a pull request where you don't preserve the 100% code coverage. All right, with that, I would like to conclude all the resolved tasks. Any additions, note, or questions to the presentation of the resolved tasks? If not, then let's go into the backlog and let's see what let's go into the backlog, but starting from the top level view. So let's see what we have there on the level of the sagas. So this is unchanged from the last month. We want, or we need to have, an up-to-date and current QA setup in SUSE, and that includes the SUSE Nuremberg data center with the security zone migration. and that also includes having properly maintained machine. So there's still some tasks left over or pending after the department merge from QA SLE and QA maintenance some by now years ago. But there's still some leftover work where, in before there were unclear responsibilities or abandoned machines even, and in the end, people are still relying on the services. So we took over that, but of course, to be able to maintain that, we need to, make sure that we have an up-to-date operating system, that we have some management framework like SALT in place, that we have a backup, documentation, contact persons, and all that. The next one is the older one, and also actually the oldest Saga scale-out redundant load balancing deployments. Okay, easy containers on Kubernetes. I would also include cloud there. So let's mention some ideas. For example, what we have currently in the backlog is a disaster recovery scenario covered. What we already have is that we have an easy way to, well, one can start OpenKey in the cloud, and people do that, so that's not a question. But the question is, how would you be able to replace an on-premise production instance like OpenKey SUSE with an instance that is running in the cloud, including access to all necessary services? We have instructions for that, and when we came up with the instructions, we also improved our code, our deployment recipes, so also upstream OpenKA benefits from that. And what we have as an experiment right now is to use Terraform to deploy an infrastructure which includes a web UI and a worker together. And after that, maybe we will even consider shifting some production resources into the cloud for continuous service. We have properly maintained maintenance QA tooling. We mentioned QAM bot, stable and reliable QAM bot being one part. I think there's only really one story left here. I don't know if you can easily identify that from the big list of, oh yeah, right here it is. So migrate, replace, upgrade obsolete test report search tool. So if we manage to conclude that and to also get rid of some older virtual machine providing some services, then we can conclude this bigger block, because all the other tasks are finished in there. So I expect that to be done within, hopefully, until the end of this year. The next one is stable and updated non-chemo backends for SLE validation, which, for example, what I just presented before about code coverage, that would be covered in this story, because there's the chemo backend which is properly covered, but for changes in non-chemo backends, it's more tricky and more challenging to come up with proper tests which exercise the code but don't completely mock out all the expected behavior, but simulate something which would be a reliable presentation of the real hardware. Arita?
Yeah, I have a question here, because in 03 we had the problem that we had to change some QEMO stuff for this x86-64 V2
Yes.
thingy in Alp. Will we see some fallout on our internal stuff as well? And is this somehow related to these backends?
That was already started. It's not related to that, because this one's a stable and updated non-chemo backends. What you mentioned is actually only for how chemo can simulate the different x86-64 sub-architectures. So basically, I myself did not actively do any changes for that, but what I followed in a discussion is that people can just change the settings of the workers freely to match the expectations, right?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay.
And as far as I know, that change was already conducted for both OpenKA OpenSUSE.org and OpenKA SUSE.e. So what you mentioned, what Marina mentioned, is related. So some people might have followed also discussion on SUSE factory mailing list about the architecture level, like V1, V2, V3 of x86-64, changing the default and dropping support in the older versions. And of course, when you want to do that, then you want to test it properly. And if you test it with OpenQA default Chemo, then I assume that still simulates an x86-64 V1 and therefore wouldn't be able to execute the code. So you can change that to host or some other specific settings to support to simulate a more recent machine.
Can I have a question on that?
Sure.
This change doesn't mean that we have to test against or V1, V2, and maybe later V3. So
Um,
the test will be
right.
multiplied.
Yes. Well, but yes, in theory, it makes sense to conduct a test against all the different variants of machines. This is why Chemo can simulate a lot. I mean, I guess the oldest bigger discussion um, in that area would be laptop, right? Because for a laptop, one can also simulate different things. For example, you can see here that Chemo machine, there's a specific setting, but the Chemo CPU setting is now changed to host, which means that what we rely on is what the hardware provides, which is at least V2. So this is why we have that change. But in theory, there are a whole lot of parameters that could be changed in Chemo, and you can test against all of them. In some cases, that's done with bare metal tests, but I would say it's much more efficient to test most of the parameters first with Chemo, and only then, if all those tests succeed, would look into bare metal tests for different machine variants. How far you want to go? Well, I don't think you need to, you don't need to duplicate the complete test matrix to the different architectures or sub-architectures, but maybe have one scenario, which is like a standard scenario, maybe including some kernel-specific testing for each set of parameters. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Right, and then the last saga, which is the second oldest, is SUSE maintenance QA workflows with full automatic testing, approval, and release. If I'm not mistaken, then that one also only really depends on a single ticket, so it's already far progressed. And I mentioned QEMBot writing comments on IBS, so that might be for that saga, but I'm not exactly sure right now. Anyway, it would fit in here. But maybe there are 2 or more tickets that are still open here. So that's the level of the sagas. And now in our complete backlog, we currently have 93 tickets. And as you can see, for example, there's one new recover storage QA SUSE. That's a reactive ticket. So we have this bigger storage host, and somehow that isn't responding anymore. So we would need to check what happened there, if there was some change in the network or if there's some other problem. In the workable section, so we have sporadic issues in tests. That's the tests for the OpenQA source code itself. So don't be alarmed if it says typing issue in Commons UI, so it is not related to OpenGate tests, mistyping or anything. Product not scheduled about database deadlock, and then there are various pipeline errors for the tooling. For example, OpenGate trigger from OBS, what triggers the tests for CLI product validation. That's called OpenGate trigger from OBS. And that one fails, but sporadically. In the Circle CI upstream tests, we need to investigate that. Then we have the internal salt states pipeline, which fails in the OpenGate worker. This might be related to performance issues reading from the OpenGate repositories. And then there are still some which could be related to the change in the network. Then I mentioned QM-bot comments on OBS. We have one O3 machine which was under warranty in service by the vendor and is now back, but we can't reach the machine, so something's missing with the IPMI passwords. The problem is that it was already in the server room, and now SUSE in Nürnberg being at multiple locations, it's a bit more tricky to get people on site. So yeah, it can take some more days to resolve that. But also in the Prague location, we have workers which are now connected to the network, but now need to be put into the OpenGate infrastructure by applying salt recipes or installing operating system. Yeah, we plan to conduct a SUSE Q Tools team internal in-place workshop in this fiscal year, in this SUSE fiscal year, meaning likely during the next calendar year 2023. That's also something which we never did within that team, I think, because we are mostly because we are highly distributed. Let's see about that. Then I want to mention, for example, the oldest still open ticket in our backlog is comment about intermittent sporadic test issues on original job if OpenGate investigate retry jobs passes. So the idea there is that, let me show you. We have automatically triggered investigation jobs. So whenever OpenGate jobs fail and all of the label carryover or auto review and such do not label the job already to mark it as a known issues, then we start investigation tests. And as you can already see here, this is using resources as we speak. So 8 jobs are running that are currently investigation jobs, using mostly free resources, because the priority is always selected so that that the production jobs are preferred. But when there are free resources, then we trigger investigation. From each investigation job, we can come back to the original investigate origins. For example, you can see that OpenSUSE 15.5 PowerPC GNOME scenario failed. Let's take a look. Where did it fail? It failed in orphan package checks as well as in console test finish. And if we take a look in next and previous results, we can see that there is no label on that. It looked like it failed the same in before, but sometimes in between, at least, there is a pass drop. So we can use the investigation info as well, find out like what's the diff against the last good. We can see the difference here. But we also see the results from the investigation jobs. And what we see is that we already have results from last goods test where it says this one failed when we go back to the last goods test, meaning that going back to the git commit of the test distribution at the time of the last good doesn't automatically fix the problem. So likely it's either a product issue, infrastructure issue, or a persistent sporadic issue, which was prevalent already before. And for that, we would need to know the results from the other jobs. Whenever we do have all the results together, then we can combine that into a message to say like, well, depending on those results, then we can decide, is it a test regression, a product regression, an infrastructure problem, or a sporadic issue. Let's see if we find example when we go back one job. So yeah, what you can see here is that we have 2 incomplete jobs and 2 failed, but the important part and another one which is a retriggered retry job, which also failed. But that means that this is not just a sporadic issue which was fixed in the meantime, but really something that persists. So we already have that message in this case. And what we would like to have is other cases covered. For example, we would like to have a comment about sporadic issues where maybe if the retry job would pass, then we would know afterwards like, okay, so this is something that, with retrying would go back to past. It's a sporadic issue, so it should be noted, at least with a comment. And then what we can do is we can provide, this was also mentioned as an idea last week, and we already had that on the roadmap one way or another, to say, have an overview of all sporadic issues. Okay. So on the one hand, you would like to know the overview of all the sporadic issues. On the other hand, if you know that this is a sporadic issue, then maybe you want to treat the results differently. Maybe you want to say like, well, okay, it's a sporadic issue. Let's treat the job as not a blocker, maybe automatically retrigger and such, right? We can already do that with auto review, providing the special comment, but that needs the human reviewers to make the decision and find a regex that identifies the specific issue, and then saying like, whenever this test failure happens, then retrigger automatically. What I would like to see is a more automated approach to make a decision. Of course, that should be configurable. Some people want that, some people don't want that. Maybe it's applicable for certain products and maybe for others not. But in general, that we can come up with a much more specific message to the users, first in OpenQA comments, but later on also in corresponding linked systems. Let's say, for example, if we can clearly identify that we have a product regression, and let's say this is a SLE maintenance test, which is related to a single submit request, then we should be able to comment back into that submit request to say, hey, the test failed and it really looks like a product regression, right? So we wouldn't need any human reviewer to make that triaging of test failures and save you guys the time. The other way around, if we can clearly identify like something is a test regression, because if we retry, it fails. If we go back to the last good build, it still fails. But if we go back to the last good test, then it passes, then it's very likely a test regression. So what we can do is, I can see that, for example, Dimstar is doing that a lot by identifying such test regressions with this information, or maybe mostly he also is faster than OpenGA investigate jobs, who already knows like, yeah, okay, it worked in before, now it doesn't work anymore. You take a look into investigation job, you take a look into the test log, and you find like, yeah, this says work in progress, send Firefox crash report if crashed, and now Firefox fails, then I would say like it's pretty likely that this commit is the problem. And if not sure, then of course you can follow that git commit and you would then be able to see if it's related. All right, so that's what is planned in our workable backlog. Let me point out that actually let me try to show that. So I'm trying to put reactive work on tickets where we didn't actually plan that in before, but we need to react on something. So you can see this tag here. And in some cases, we have that already in the workable tickets. Our statistics tell us that right now, roughly 60% of all tickets are reactive work. That would mean that if we have 18 workable tickets during the course of a month, we will work, this is 30 days, and we roughly will work on 60 tickets. That would mean that at the end of the month, we should definitely be finished with this block of tickets, right? But during the course of the month, we will have roughly 60% of all the new tickets that come in as reactive work that we didn't plan in before, but need to react on. And those are usually higher priority tickets, like high or urgent, sometimes immediate. And this is then, of course, costing most of our time. What we currently work on is, there was a problem found by Adam Will and also worked on by Adam Will from Fedora currently about the big-int conversion, including a database migration of indices. And we did that some months ago. But of course, depending on the starting point from where you do the upgrade and then the necessary migration, that could happen anytime later. So this is being worked on. We have one alert about UAM bot scheduling running into a timeout. We have a performance regression of auth audience. I think that was created by Guillaume. Then we have two low tickets, which are, signature introduction. I mentioned that in before, and also refactoring related to increasing the code coverage of auth audience. And then in the feedback block, what you can expect to show an impact soon is, for example, those two tickets, which are both related to, again, the SUSE network structure migration. And that one I need to check because it doesn't have an assignee, so I would need to take a look into more detail later on. All right, so with that, I'm done. Do you have questions or additions to the overall backlog right now? Is there anything that you see which makes you wonder, or is there anything which you don't see which you would like to have commented on? Okay, fine. That looked like it. The next milestone roadmap presentation will be at the would be on the 6th of January. I think most people will be in their Christmas vacation or at least offline on that day because it's public holidays in some regions. So maybe we will just do that at the start of February again, which is fine because there wouldn't be that much impact. Okay, yeah, right. So for that, let me conclude. So thank you for your attendance and see you again next time.